As you know, brothers and sisters, today's program is the second of its kind. The AIM platform today is discussing the topic of urban Islam and street culture. With us is Sheikh Ahmed Haneef, a Canadian Muslim cleric who studied in the Hawza Ilmiya in Qom and currently works for the Islamic Center of England. The Sheikh will be discussing this topic for a period of time, and thereafter we'll be having an open question and answer session in which we can all participate in asking our questions to the Honorable Sheikh. Please welcome the Sheikh with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله وحبيبه أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Glad to see a whole lot of familiar faces here. Makes me feel very much at home in this, I think, a pioneering subject that had me thinking a lot too. Urban Islam and street culture. Allah says in the Holy Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَوِلْدَانِ الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا. Allah says, and why should you not fight in the way of Allah and the downtrodden men, women and children who say, our Lord, bring us out of this town whose people are oppressors, and appoint for us a guardian from you, and appoint us a helper from you. And Imam Ali alayhi salam is quoted to have said, وَاسْكُنْ لِأَمْسَارَ الْعِظَامِ فَإِنَّهَا جِمَاعُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَاحْذَرْ مَنَازِلَ الْغَفْلَةِ وَالْجَفَاءِ. And keep your residence in large cities, for they are the gathering places of Muslims, and stay away from places of ignorance and coarseness. The topic of urban Islam is something that is rooted in the Islamic historical experience. We notice that society is a combination of shared values, commonly accepted modes of behavior, and the correlation between the individual and society. So you find that shared values and commonly accepted modes of behavior are very important in defining what a community is. And we see that in modern society, especially where Muslims are concerned, it raises the issue of whether there are shared modes of behavior and the correlation of people's activities with each other. And this must necessarily set up tensions in society, especially when you have, like in modern society, differences in value systems and how people look at their society and what is expected of them. But this is not just true for Muslims only, or not just true for multicultural modern society. We also see that within that society itself, we have a group of people, a large groups of people, maybe one can even say the majority of people, who do not feel a sense of belonging in that society, who tend to be the people who are rejected from that society, and so they form an underclass in that society. When we look at Islamic society, and you have to excuse me for the party that's happening on downstairs, because they're celebrating something really nice. the victory of the Muslims over the Zionist entity. Tempted to change my topic. But when we look at Islamic society, we notice, like other traditional societies, Islamic societies tended to be very stable. And one of the reasons why it is very stable is because of these shared values. When we compare these shared values in Islamic society and the shared values in modern society, we find some fundamental differences. For one, the shared values of the Muslim society is based upon the Sunnah and the methods and practices of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these values are internalized. These values come from a divine source. And so there is no opposition to it. People evaluate themselves in terms of this commonly shared, internalized spiritual reality. Modern society, however, is one where these values are actually constructed by human beings. And we are seeing this happening in front of our very eyes. Take, for example, the issue of homosexuality. The homosexuality in 1970, up till 1975 was considered to be from the, I can't remember the scientific name of the book where the DSM, am I correct? People here in psychology, DSM, right? Yeah. Yes, exactly. It was, thank you. It was included as a mental illness. However, by 1975, they had changed it. And they did not change it based upon scientific investigation and experimentation. It was based upon a vote. And why was it based upon a vote? Was because there was a gay rights movement that created a sense of general acceptance for this type of behavior. And if you, I guess you would not have been in my time, but I remember like in the 70s, you know, you'd have a movie and one of the characters is going to be gay, but you would not know until the end of the movie. And in the meantime, the movie is so constructed that you sympathize with the gay person, and by the end of the movie, you are confronted with what we call a cognitive dissonance. You like somebody that is opposed to what you are against. And this leads to a sort of a psychological breakdown of your resistance to that. And we see now, right in front of our very eyes, this category of people, and I don't want to get into gay bashing here, but I want to give you as a good example of what I'm talking about. Right in front of our very eyes, they are now being constructed as a sort of a model of the ideal human being. They're the most handsome, for example. You know, you have this joke that is going around. Oh, he's so cute. Is he gay? Right? You have that type of thing going on. And then we have now the invention of the idea of metrosexual, meaning a heterosexual guy who is well put together, goes to the gym, eats well, looks handsome, dresses decently, and therefore he is now classified as somewhat funny, right? You know, so we are seeing this artificial change in values taking place in front of our very eyes. And modern society is that. It is based upon rationalized or artificial values that people cannot internalize as easily as they would be able to internalize, for example, religious or spiritual criteria. So in the first case, in an Islamic or a traditional environment, you would not find the sense or the prevalence of rebellion, okay? Rebellion in behavior or rebellion in politics or what have you, as you would find in modern society, because generally what a human being creates, another human being can destroy. And this is one of the things that characterizes what we would call the culture of the underclass, or street culture, as you would call it. It is a rebellion by the people who have not been catered for in this society. People who find themselves falling through the cracks. People who find themselves at odds with the general value trend of society. And this is basically a rebellion against liberal democracy that has failed people. It is also a rebellion against things like racism and classism that might exist in society. Now, although you would find that in Islamic society, it is the nomadic element that tends to be the driving force for the spread of Islam and not the urban element. The urban element, however, tends to include the nomadic element. And so people would find themselves being under the, the protection of the Islamic society. And so Islamic society would be something that transcends tribe, for example, even though it would protect the tribe as the major source of social security. Modern society has eradicated the tribe in the favor of the nation state. So whereas the tribe, the family, the clan, and the tribe would look after the social welfare, the social, economic, and political welfare of its members, now this is something that is relegated to the state. And indeed now, the state, especially when we consider the issue of things like child care and so on, is basically really the true parents or true artificial parents of people. So Islam maintained the tribe. It maintained these types of personal relationships. And indeed, Muslims tended to have a kind of a suspicion for rationalized systems. And so you would find that, for example, the delivery of services in a Muslim environment was one that occurred on a personal level, not on a sort of abstract institutional level, even though it had certain elements of that. What you find now, for example, is the same reality in modern Muslim societies today, but because they are now confronted with other aspects of modernism getting into that system, you find that the personal relationship type system tending to break down in Muslim societies. Islam, and one of the reasons why I mentioned tribe is because the lack of the tribe is one of the major reasons for the creation of the artificial tribe, which is a very important element of street culture, which is the gang. Allah says in the Holy Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. O mankind, indeed, we created you from a male and a female, and we made you nations and tribes that you may identify yourselves with each other. Allah says He made us nations and tribes. So nations and tribes, when Allah makes us nations and tribes, it means that the tribal sense is something inherent in the human makeup. The tribal sense is part of our fitrah. Modern society has destroyed the organic tribe. And it has destroyed the organic tribe by destroying the family. Our idea of the family in modern society now is a truncated idea. It is the idea of the nuclear, or what I would call the nucleated family. Father, mother, and kids. That is it. You know, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so on are really very peripheral to this central focus. And indeed, many modern societal families do not have extended family type of relationships. When you don't have extended family type relationships, you don't have tribal relationships. But because the tribe is a very important aspect of our fitrah, we end up creating artificial tribes. We end up creating artificial tribes, whether it be a trade union, whether it be a teachers union, whether it be a group of professionals or what have you. These are all artificial tribes. And one aspect of the artificial tribe in on the street is the gang. What the gang provides is exactly what a tribe provides. It only functions on a delinquent level and not on a socially constructive level. Now, we live in a multicultural setting. A multicultural setting is not something alien to Islam. The glue that keeps a multicultural setting together in Islam is belief. Is belief in God, is belief in the Holy Prophet, is trying to function in accordance with these criteria. Modern society is based on trying to function on the basis of rational criteria, and this is what leads to a big problem. So in an Islamic society, there is a tribe and there is the state. And there is a bit of a tension between them, but Islam overcomes these tribal divisions without destroying the tribe by keeping the tribe as a unit of, again, as I mentioned, social support for the individuals. So people would have a sense of belonging to Islam, while at the same time having a strong identity with the tribes that they are part of. Street culture tends to be two types, really. One type of street culture is what I would call the sort of popular or popularization of consumer patterns, the popularization of certain types of cultural patterns, and so on. And on the other hand, you have street culture actually being identified with basically delinquent or antisocial behavior. What we have to realize, I think, is that those people who are part of street culture are people who are basically rebelling against those negative fissures in society that they perceive that they are victims of. So street type culture is a culture that is anti the status quo. And so you would find among street culture types of behavior patterns, ways of dressing, ways of social interaction that actually go against what the status quo is all about. So you would find in street culture people who are against, let's say, irreligiosity. You would find people who tend to be in the terms of our society homophobic, and I use that because I have to put myself not in danger by being charged in court for hate. Okay, you would find that street culture tending to generate types of cultural activity that reflect their criticisms and their attitude to modern society. One of the major expressions of street culture is music. And one of the most contemporary expressions of this music is what we call hip hop. When we look at the genesis of hip hop and the growth of hip hop, the early growth and genesis of hip hop, we see that at the peak of hip hop in the 80s, hip hop was, or rap music at the time, was a music that was very fighting with respect to social criticism. One very, very popular group was a group called Public Enemy. I'm sure you probably have heard of Public Enemy #1, okay? Public Enemy, for example, made a kind of a music. They called it the noise. It wasn't a dance music as such, although people could dance to it. It was really a cacophony of different songs put together very creatively that did not distract from the message that they had to give. This was hip hop. Interestingly enough, the hip hop in the 1980s was one of the major means whereby Islam was spread among the African American community in the United States and later on the Hispanic community in the United States. Many Muslims were involved in hip hop because it was a major means of disseminating consciousness about one's objective circumstance. Another example of a musical form that also was critical of the system, albeit much more instrumental than it was vocal, was jazz music. And indeed, in the early parts of the 20th century, in the 1920s, 30s, right up to the post-war, immediate post-war period, the spread of Islam among jazz musicians was much greater than among other people in the society. Indeed, one of the greatest jazz musicians, John Coltrane, wrote a song called A Love Supreme. And in this song, the chorus was A Love Supreme, and later on in the chorus, it changed into Allah Supreme. John Coltrane experimented with different musical genres that came from the East. Now, some of us might be, from a fiqh point of view, some of us might be anti-music, so this might not be something that might be impressive to you. But there are other aspects of fiqh, for example, that of Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, and Imam Khamenei, where they allowed music, but not music that was associated with what we call lah wal la'ib, meaning frivolity and just corruption. Any music that was associated with that type of lifestyle or that type of form is forbidden in Islam. One of the underlying philosophies behind those people who allowed for the presence of music in Islam, it goes like this. Islam is the religion of the fitrah of a human being's nature. How do we distinguish between nature and nurture? How do we distinguish between nature and people trained or acculturated to accept a certain type of lifestyle and who might identify with that emotionally? One of the ways is to look at human society in different areas, in different geographical areas, or in different times. And we say, if such a trend is found in all of these cases, then that particular tendency is something in our fitrah, that human beings practice all over. It might be weakened, but it cannot be destroyed. There is no society ever that does not have music, none. Even if it means, for example, a band that is a marching band for the army, there's no society that does not have that. However, music is something quite dangerous, one can say, because it can affect your soul directly. Indeed, among many of the physicians of Al-Andalus, they used forms of music in order to cure certain forms of madness. Okay, so it has a very pervasive effect upon the mind. It's very important and very crucial what kind of music you listen to, who the person who is singing it, what kind of soul that person has. So don't walk away from here thinking that listening to Rihanna is something that is okay as long as you pray 5 times a day. You see, there's something subtle happening to your mind. Music is, in this society today, a form of social expression. And hip-hop is a music that the underclass has used in order to oppose whatever systems or whatever conditions that they find themselves opposed to. Like football, where all you need is a ball and 4 stones to set up to make 2 goals, hip-hop is something that does not require sophisticated instruments. All it requires is the ability to mix and the ability to rhyme. And so it becomes a very important tool that is available for that underclass in order to express themselves. The culture of oppression has tried and it always tries to co-opt the cultural forms that emerge from the street. I mean, for example, I'm not just talking about music too. I'm talking about, for example, graffiti. Graffiti is another form of street art, for example. How you dress. I remember early hip hop, everybody used to dress with loose clothing, women and men, you know, and you used to find it so Islamic, you know. What they try to do is subvert the media of transmitting that revolutionary tendency. And the best way they do this is to co-opt the music by co-opting the production of this music. At the beginning in the 1990s, you had a whole lot of independent music producers that were promoting hip-hop. And if you look at the history, many of them were bought out by Warner Brothers, by Sony, etc., etc. And then they started to have their own in-house artists. And after that, the themes started to change from police brutality to gang violence. It started to change from respecting a woman to treating her, calling her the B word, and so forth and so on. So now you have a complete deviation of this type of music, especially in the West. But because it has become a vehicle for oppressed people, you find this genre expanding all over the world. So you find people doing hip-hop in Palestine, people doing hip-hop in Iraq, people doing hip-hop in places wherever young people want to make a statement and express consciousness to the population at large, especially to the young people. What Muslims need to do is to be able to be cognizant of these forms. It is very important because we need to know how young people are thinking, how the new generation or the young generation is thinking. It is an advice that I got from a young person myself, because I'm an OG. I'm an OG. You know, I'm 55 years old. Okay. I remember when hip hop came out, like an OG, I was like, what kind of music is this? You know, until a young person said, well, if you want to know what young people think, you better listen to this music, you know, to see how they're thinking, you see? And so we need to be able to gauge this. Now, street culture is moving towards spoken word. Very important. It's moving towards spoken word. In other words, raw poetry. This is where it's coming now. In fact, it's a genre of music that has stayed around for a very long time. In fact, too long. You find, for example, a lot of musical forms, R&B, jazz, etc., tending to maybe last about 10, 20 years, and then a new form would take place. Hip-hop has been around for over like 20, 30 years. So it's about time for it to move on. And one of the forms that is sort of now coming to the fore is what we call spoken word. Just as Muslims in those days used that genre to spread Islam and to educate people, so now Muslims should be taking up the spoken word, and it becomes very much more consonant with our own Islamic sensitivities. Because spoken word, you don't have to have music for spoken word. All you have to do is to have a very good command of the English language in which we are living in, and expression of that language. To stifle the tendency of the underclass to be conscious of their environment, what the ruling system does is create diversions and deviations. And the two major ones, or the three major ones, would be music, sex, and consumerism. Also couple that with drugs. And these are the four things that have become the four horsemen in terms of undermining underclass culture. Now, why is street culture important for us to know? Is first of all, the street, the people of the street, I don't necessarily live on the street, but that's what they call it. Street culture means the culture of the underclass, basically. The underclass, the culture of the underclass, is the driving culture from which the culture of the upper class is derived. You find that the role of Islam, even up to maybe 10 years ago, and even now, you find that the role of Islam is still pervasive in popular music. You know, you had Lauryn Hill in one of her songs saying, you got to stay on the deen, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, and she's not even a Muslim, okay? Because that's the kind of reality you found on the street. When you went to New York City in the 70s and the 80s, you found Muslims everywhere, and Muslims actually working with the oppressed and the deprived in society. Because after the Reagan era, with the cutbacks in social services and proper policing, you found huge areas without any control. There were parts of New York City, if you went to visit somebody, you sat on the floor, not because they were Muslim, but because you were afraid of a stray bullet coming through the window and taking your head off. You see? And who were the people who stepped into that vacuum and created social order and stability? They were the Muslims. I remember going to a place in Detroit, in the heart of the ghetto. And Detroit, at one point, had the reputation of being the murder capital of the United States. In Detroit, in this area that I went, we went through, it was almost like going through a war zone. And all of a sudden, you entered into an oasis. It was a place that was colonized by African-American Muslims. And yes, come time for Salah, they would all take out their piece and put it down on the floor while they prayed. This was the kind of life they lived, but they created a safe zone. Another area like that, I remember I was talking to a non-Muslim sister who said that she lived in a Muslim area. And in that area, she felt the safest. She could leave her house with the door open or unlocked and know that nobody would break into her house. I knew one white sister who lived in a ghetto in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan. And, she lived alone. And you had a lot of African-American Muslims who used to look out for this sister. And this sister would be dressed in like complete hijab. And then we're talking about the early 80s. complete hijab, all black clothing, you know, and anybody, any strange person who would come to that apartment building, these brothers would ask them who you were and what do you have, what business do you have here? This was a kind of role that Muslims played. And it is from that type of experience with Muslims that people became interested in Islam. You go into prison today, and in prison today, you have to make a choice. Everybody in prison has to make a choice. Who are you going to hang with? Are you going to hang with the Muslims? Are you going to hang with the skinheads? Are you going to hang with the Christians? Okay, who are you going to hang with? And most people will say, I'm going to hang with the Muslims because nobody would touch you. So these Muslims entered into the street and they worked upon those mustad'afin, those oppressed men, women, and children who are asking for a wali, who are asking for a guide, who are asking for protection. We're talking about urban culture as well, urban Islam. Because in urban Islam, we have two types of Muslims. We have uptown Muslims and we have downtown Muslims. The uptown Muslims, among them, you got a lot of sincere people. But among them are some Muslims who want to fit in, who want to be part of the system, who want to be part of the problem and not part of the solution. A lot of these people live double lives. They go out there and instead of being Muhammad, they're Mo. Instead of being Yusuf, they're Joe. And they think that, okay, after work, I could always go to Doe Tawassul or Doe Kumail and I pray, Juma prayers and I'm fine. But you're not fine because our responsibility is to stand up for the oppressed. Our responsibility is to provide answers and to provide encouragement and guidance for those people who are the oppressed among us. The street is the best place for this because these people are already alienated from that oppressive environment, that godless environment. These people are already creating their own culture. Where do you think high five came from? Everybody is high-fiving now every time you score a goal. Whether you're in Iran or whether you're in Iraq, whether you're in Azerbaijan or whether you're in Afghanistan. You score a goal, give me 5 on top. You understand? Where did that come from? That came from the street. Because in the street, the oppressed people tend to have a much more human relationship with each other. Whereas the other relationship is based upon social transactions. The street is where the heart is. But they are misguided. They don't have guidance. And they thirst for guidance. And this is where Islam comes in. When you look at the spread of Islam, Islam is not spread in Wall Street. Islam is not spread in Canary Wharf. Islam is spread, where's the bad place in this area? In Shepherd's Bush. That's where Islam is being spread. Okay? By people who have been rejected from their society. In this society, there is no love. Parents are too busy working to give love to their kids. Love is a very rare commodity. Why do kids join gangs? Because they get respect. If you look at gangs, one of the most important things is respect. Even the mafia, respect is a very important thing. And so respect is something that is very, very treasured in a gang situation. Love. Tupac was talking about the gang showed a young brother love. That's why he joined a gang. But along with that gang are certain types of delinquent behaviors. And it is not that they want to stay in that type of situation. They have no choice. They have to put food on the table. They have to feed themselves. And the only alternatives that they think they have is to sell dope. Is to sell drugs. In other words, then, do something that perpetuates the destruction of the community. And so they want to come out of that. So Muslims have to provide a means by which they could come out of this. Now, you're talking about the urban Muslim, and you got the ones who, the wannabes, okay? The ones who want to be part of what's going on. The ones who want to be a Mark Zuckerberg. The ones who want to be this and want to be that. But among the urban Muslims, and we are urban Muslims here, are those people who could communicate life skills to these people. Those people who can share with them the means and the strategies whereby they could come out of the ghetto. They could come out of that depressive situation. And this is our job. And when you look at, for example, the history of a group like the Nation of Islam, you find that you had Palestinians, you had Arabs of different sorts being among them, teaching these people Arabic and teaching these people strategies. You look at the Nation of Islam, and I'm not saying the Nation of Islam is a good example of Islam, but it's a good example of a group of people who, in the name of Islam, are trying to get people to come out of that depressed situation. And in fact, the Nation of Islam drew the majority of its support from the street. And within about 20 years, the Nation of Islam was the largest middle-class black organization that America had seen. The largest middle-class black organization. An organization that started to attract doctors and engineers and professionals of all sorts. But not professionals who are wannabes, professionals who want to make a difference. Unfortunately, many of our Muslims today don't want to be identified with the street, are even afraid of the people of the street. Just like the rest of the society, you're in a car, you're in a depressed neighborhood in Harlem, and you see a black dude coming your way, you lock your doors. Okay? I know of Iranians in Los Angeles who don't want to sit near to a Hispanic or a Mexican on the bus. Why? Because they look too much alike. Heaven forbid they associate me with them. There's an us and them type of an attitude. Muslims have to be more flexible, have to be more open. I don't want you just to be my friend. I want you to be prepared to say, okay, he's a good guy to marry my daughter. That's where the problem comes in. That's where the problem comes in. Not me, I'm not talking about, I'm just giving myself as a... Okay? So this is the type of reality that we are faced with. If a balanced, reasonable, tolerant, patient, civilizational Islam does not fill that vacuum, what you will find is a hostile, intolerant, exclusivist, ready to put a bomb downtown type of Islam that is going to face that, will fill that vacuum. And indeed, this is what we are finding. The kind of Islam that these young men and young women are turning to is that kind of Islam. It's an Islam that is hostile. It's an Islam that destroys our social security. It's an Islam that does not focus on creativity and upon economic and social progress. It's an Islam that is rooted in bringing external types of hostilities within the community. In our reform of the street, we do not want to take away from them that culture of resistance. We want to fine-tune it. Fine-tune it to the extent that these people can create structures that are meaningful and are useful to today's society. You're looking at me, I don't have enough time. Where's Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad. One of the cultural manifestations of street culture is turning things on their head. Those criteria, those labels that are put on people, they take it, they embrace it, and they give it a different meaning. So, for example, the N-word. The N-word was once a word. You know what the N-word is, right? Anybody doesn't know what the N-word means? Doesn't mean no, okay? The N-word is a word you hear it in rap music all the time. In fact, one day I was on the street in Iran, and this sheikh comes up to me and he says, Sheikh Haneef, are you a nigger? So I had to give him a little I had to give him a little explanation as to why he shouldn't say this. So it takes it and it makes it positive. And it changes spelling. It's not N-I-G-G-E-R anymore, it's N-I-G-G-A. Now, I don't approve of it, but this is the function of street culture. It is because they do not have a superior criterion. It's because they do not have a higher means of social criticism or means of self-definition that instinctively they do this. Anti-feminism. We live in a society where men are no longer men. As I mentioned before, a guy who gets himself together thinks of himself as a metrosexual. You see? We live in a society where, for example, feminism is something that dominates society, and feminism is nothing but masculinity or masculine power orientations being applied to women. That's all it is. So you have that type of anti-feminism taking place, and that type of attitude sometimes goes to extreme, where women are basically disrespected, you see. Islam, again, comes into this type of environment and expresses and emphasizes the respect for women. That women are, for example, queens, and you are kings, that type of a thing. You know, you are better than them. You know, and this is one of the strategies of the Nation of Islam. Some people call the Nation of Islam racist, okay? But it was not racist in the positive sense of the word. When I say positive, I mean people being racist and justifying racism by scientific means, etc., etc. It was racism in a negative sense, in terms of a reaction to a dominant racism in the society. So where, for example, the black Christian would be confronted with the white Jesus, who legitimized then white domination in the world based upon this whiteness, the Nation of Islam came and said, God is black and the devil is white. I mean, even in Muslim art, whenever you ever seen a white devil, you ever seen a white shaitan? You never see a white shaitan, okay? You know, you see pictures of Imam Rida, for example. You know, Imam Rida was a very dark person. A lot of Muslims think that, they do. They think that our imams are perfect, and therefore the imam cannot be black. Impossible. When you read the history of Imam Jawad, alayhi salam, for example, you know, Imam Jawad, his mother was, her name was Sabika, and she was from the Nuba tribe. Have you ever seen a Nuban? People from Nubia? You know, like, South Sudan? I'm sure you've seen them on pictures. They're so black, when the light shines on them, the light on the skin looks blue. That's how black they are. You know, and he was the son of Imam Rida, okay, whose mother was African too. Now, genetics will tell you something. You know, if I'm white, I marry a black woman, and my son marries another black woman, well, hey, you know, you're definitely getting a blue-eyed guy, I'm telling you that. You see? To the extent that people even doubted whether Imam Jawad was the son of Imam Rida. And the only way they could, by these people who could tell by physiognomy he was his son, was by his feet. The similarity of their feet. Right? That's one account. You find Muslims, for example, having this problem. Okay? They got a problem with race. They got a problem with class. And this goes back to our intention for being here. Our parents, or your parents, not mine, your parents came here to make money, to get a better education, and to preserve their Islam in the process. But they did not come here to establish Islam. They did not come here to try to present an Islamic solution to the problems in the society. And so therefore, they found themselves alienated from the lower classes. Even among themselves, the upper class ones tend to be alienated from the lower class ones. And so you find the emergence of a street culture among young Muslims themselves. And this also would take certain deviant forms of anti-societal behavior that needs to be addressed, that needs to be answered. So when we think, yes.
Sure, there's a lot of questions that are
okay, you told me I could continue.
You're saying
okay, let me wrap up.
Let
me wrap up.
I would want to listen more. However, I think there are some questions coming as well. So we need to leave some time for that.
Okay, let me wrap up then.
Okay.
What I would like you to do is to think about the underclass of society and think about what you can do to bring Islamic reform and the message of Islam to the underclass. When we look at the activities of our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we look at the activities of the prophets that came before, who were the people who were following them? They were the underclass, to the extent that the bourgeoisie would say, why should I follow you? Look at the people who are following you. They don't have any significance in this society. But these people became the imams of that society. These people became the ones who were the rulers of Islamic societies later on. And this is the thing that we have to do. We have to get away from simply identifying with the status quo and start identifying with those of the oppressor. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Sheikhna, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation there on urban Islam. It's really unique to hear that kind of content in these kind of sessions. So we thank the Sheikh for that. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions today. I've got plenty of questions that have come through previously, and I'm sure there's many here as well. Would anyone like to start with a question? Any questions? Raise your hands, please. Raise your hands. And also, if possible, stand up. There's a question here? Brother, go ahead.
As you said, being accepting some of them culture which are not really bad in Islam, like Imam Khomeini gave some liberalization in the songs which are not against Islam. In this condition, we are actually sometimes losing the attraction and we get the hatred from the society which are in already, like particularly in this fatwa of music.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes in attracting this undercaste, we actually get hatreds from the society which is already in. So how you actually...
I mean, just to summarize that question, does embracing urban Islam undermine the values of Islam itself? Because there are many sacred values. It's a large responsibility that Muslims carry on their shoulders.
Right.
By embracing street culture, are we not placing, the identity of Islam in harm's way?
It's not about embracing street culture, okay? It's about changing street culture. That the essence of street culture is resistance. But it is a resistance that is manifested in a deviant form by virtue of the fact that they do not have superior values to live in accordance with. It requires some level of tolerance. For example, with respect to them. A very interesting example was a story about Sayyid Musa Sadr in Lebanon, where one of his students was with him, and he said, I have to go somewhere. And the student said, can I come with you? He said, no, I don't think you should come. He insisted. So he went with him. And he followed him, and he went to a place where he had a meeting with women. Okay? And none of the women had hijab. And they all were wearing mini skirts and stuff like that. You know? And he was talking with them and establishing a relationship with them with the aim of reforming them. This student was very alarmed. Why would you meet with these corrupt people? You see? It requires some patience. You see? And slowly, we could reform this street culture. Street culture is a reality. What we want to do is just like the Muslims in the times of the 70s and 80s had so much inroads into street culture, so much inroads in trying to provide security and help and self-respect for people, that Islam itself, as Islam, became part of street culture, a popular part of street culture. One great contemporary, Russell Simmons, okay, talking about the members of the Nation of Islam. And the members of the Nation of Islam, they didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't do drugs, they didn't even dance. Okay? But they said when we were sitting down at the street hanging out and the members of the nation passed by, everybody would stand to attention. That's Islam penetrating street culture. Another brother, the grandson of Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, was telling me one time, he said one day as a kid somebody gave him some money, a lot of money. And he was going somewhere with the money and somebody saw him with the money and they robbed him. And he was sitting on the side of the street wondering what to do, what am I going to do? And a Muslim brother came up and said, what's the problem? And he said, I had a couple of $1,000 as a kid, you know. And he told them what it was. He said, don't worry, kid, everything will be all right. He got up, went away, and he came back with a guy who took the money from him, and the guy gave him the money back. This is Islam penetrating street culture, okay? Islam penetrating street culture doesn't mean to say that you're going to be in a dance video. Doesn't mean that. In fact, that is contrary to our influence on people. I was talking to a couple of brothers, I think they were Lebanese brothers. I think it was Lebanese brothers. They were driving around in New York City and got lost. And let me tell you something. There's some parts of New York City, if you do not have a guide, you're in trouble. You might enter vertically, but you would exit horizontally. You know? And they're driving around and they're scared. Okay? And they come upon this whole bunch of hostile-looking black brothers. And they said to them, Salam alaikum. And the brothers just lightened up and said, Wa alaikum salam. They're all Muslim. And all of them opened up and they saw the leader of the group sitting behind there. And he said to him, if you didn't say Salam alaikum, you might have been in trouble. Okay? Islam is like this. I know the first time I went to one of them bad neighborhoods in New York City, you know, my wife was after me to go. Let's go check it out, you know. Before we went, we had to put on our garb. And our garb was putting on a Haji cap, you know, and she'd be like all wrapped up in hijab and everything, and we go in there and nobody will bother you. Because they know, if you touch a Muslim, you touched all of them. This is street culture, okay? This is street culture. The Muslims were like a gang, but a positive gang.
Sheikh, can I come in on this?
Yes.
I have a question here and I'm going to summarize it
Right.
slightly. Basically, urban street culture sounds like something rather turbulent, rather unstable. And I mean, you just called it, bad neighborhoods. You use that phrase yourself.
Right.
Now, a lot of youth who are not necessarily street get involved with the street because they want to be cool. And when they get involved in that kind of environment, they get in a lot of trouble, which they don't necessarily need to be part of. It's not really their scene, but they end up there. What would you say to that kind of, issue?
The coolest person on the street is the Muslim. And people want to be the coolest. when the Muslims, when you're in an area where the Muslims are the tightest, most positive, most disciplined group, everybody wants to be like you. There was a time where, for example, non-Muslims, if they were going into an unfamiliar territory, they said they'll have to take their passport. And you know what their passport was? To dress like a Muslim. Okay? To dress like a Muslim. If a guy wanted respect, okay, all he had to do was say, I'm a Muslim. Okay? That was the coolest. You see? Yes, there is this culture of cool. And as you say, there are different expressions of that. Okay? Part of it is dress, part of it is the group that you belong to. And the Islamic group, the group of Muslims that you belong to, who sees the other person as a brother or a sister who might be lost and who needs help and who's ready to help them, okay? Ain't nothing cooler than that.
Any other questions, please? Question here. It's regarding the issue of music, actually, and lahu al-la'ib, the issue of the fiqh ruling on music and hip hop itself, and how these things are perceived in the urf of the West, in the culture of the West. How does that? How do you derive rulings given where hip hop comes from and how it's classified in Western society?
Yes, as I mentioned before, hip hop has two basic periods in their history. Okay, one is as a means of social resistance. The other one is hip hop being co-opted as lahu al-la'ib. Okay? The first part still exists, but it's not mainstream anymore. There are lots of people doing it. That type of hip hop is not associated with partying and stuff like that. That type of hip hop is associated with serious thinking. Okay? Again, you know, from the fiqh point of view, in terms of fiqh where music is allowed, okay, that type of hip hop would not be considered to be frivolous and involved in nonsensical types of behavior. Okay? But this is something, again, it exists on the margins now. Okay? However, outside of the United States, outside of Europe, in many parts of the third world, where there's serious struggle taking place, okay, there's an entirely different expression of it, which goes back to the first form. And the other thing I mentioned to you is for those people who might have a problem with music, again, we are saying that the genre of the expression of resistance is moving towards spoken word, okay? And spoken word, meaning poetry, is something that we all could get involved in. We all could be cognizant of. But you have to be able to know what is happening to people on the street. And when I say on the street, I don't mean on the street, on the khiyabon. I mean in that strata of society that have these particular problems.
Sheikh, another question. I mean, there's a rising number of converts who come from the street. They belong to that culture and they embrace Islam. One aspect that one sometimes observes is that they tend to be rather militant about Islam, rather aggressive in their world projection of how they want to, implement Islam. Is that sometimes not contradictory to Islamic etiquettes, and does that not harm the fabrics of Muslim society in its traditional sense?
Exactly. This is what I had mentioned before. If we who have a rational, tolerant, systematic view of Islam as a reforming element in society, as a force for social change, not in the violent sense, but in the exemplary sense, as a force that is positive for society. If we who have this type of approach or this type of understanding do not go to the street and spread that Islam, another one is going to take its place. And that other one is actually taking its place. Okay? That's that Salaf Takfiri Salafi type of intolerant type of behavior. Okay? That's that type of attitude where you want to put a bomb on a train or a bus and don't even think about the fact that your auntie might be on that bus or that train who might suffer for it. Okay? That is a kind of a religious gangsterism, if you want to call it that. If we do not take the initiative, we would be giving away the role by default to other more extremist views. And we would have to answer to Allah for that.
Sheikh, what about the methodology? Because if like I said, it's a turbulent environment. You're saying that Muslims should be more active in spreading Islamic values to the urban society, and as such, bringing them across and inshallah having a prosperous society. What are the methods that we can use to embrace this idea?
Missionary work. Missionary work. Getting up and going in that environment, simply enough, armed with pamphlets, armed with CDs, and talking to people. One of the things that Muslims used to do was a person is selling drugs on the street, that Muslim will come and stand right next to that drug pusher and tell people, don't buy from this person. And talk to the guy. Why are you killing your own people? Why are you destroying your own society? Well, what can I do? That's all I can do. Well, okay, I'll help you find a job. And you got an uncle, got a business, a repair shop up the street. You try to hook him up with your uncle. We're talking about the urban Muslim who's got a job, who's got a business, who's got a profession. We have to coordinate with each other to be able to do stuff like that. It's quite simple.
The street sometimes has, often has unwritten rules. You mentioned respect,
yes,
brotherhood, authority,
yes,
defending honor and dignity.
yes,
These kind of traits that are prevalent on the street.
Right.
Are they not Islamic values themselves?
Well,
is there not a lot of cohesion involved in Islam and the urban street at the moment and how they mix?
Well, that's why I was mentioning that many of these values on the street tend to be positive, but expressed in a negative way. Yeah. You know what I mean? Right? So, for example, respect. You get respect on the street. Somebody steps on your lily white, brand new Nikes, and he wants to kill you for that. You see? The prisons, a very important place to spread Islam. Because the majority of the people in the prisons come from that lower class, from that underclass. You spread Islam in the prisons, they take it back to the street. And they do a better job than us. If we sit down and we strategize, we would find a way to enter into the street and using these values, bring out the positive aspects of them. But yes, be able to know the culture in order to navigate around it.
Country, and then you're asking them to come and indulge into the street, as you call it. It's going to cause a bit of, firstly, cultural problems, and secondly, Islamic values, because you then there are things, as you said, in the street culture that go against some of the Islamic values. And I think that's where the problem is, because a lot of people want to go in to guide some people, but then you have the Islamic issue that I'm going to be like them, so then people will look at me from my society and think, oh my God, what happened to him?
I mean, how much is the street going to influence Muslims?
That's.
I mean,
how's
it's
that
a fear. If you're talking about this issue, a lot of our young youths, they go out onto the street and then they come back different. So what do we say about that?
I think, first of all, the people who just came from over there, especially if they're older guys, I don't think they can do it, right? A lot of your parents here wouldn't be able to do that. You know, it is something that is, with the exception of exceptional people. I remember one time, I just as an aside, I was after Salatul Jummah in Qom, me and some African brothers were hanging out just talking, and I saw this Iranian guy walking up to me, older guy. At that time I was probably about, I don't know, 30 something. You know, and this guy is an older guy, maybe in his 40s, 50s, you know, and he had a kufi on, you know, that was kind of colorful. And Iranian guys don't wear colorful kufis, right? You know, and the way he was walking, okay, he was walking very New Yorkish, very New York street kind of a walk, you know, like, you know, don't mess with me kind of thing, you know. And he's walking up to us, but in a friendly way, but I can check the walk. And he comes up to me, and I said to him, we started to talk, and this guy is talking with a perfect American accent. But every time he would mention certain Iranian words, he would say it, perfectly. For example, us English speakers would say Tabriz, but an Iranian would say Tabriz, So he's like, where you from? You're like, I'm from Tabriz, you know what I mean? That type of a thing. And like, where do you live? He says he's an architect, and he lives in the heart of the ghetto, okay? And he's been involved in spreading Islam there for a long time, see? So people like that can do it. Young people here can do it, you see? In terms of losing a man and so on, the person who would go in there to spread Islam, okay, I don't think there would be any danger of being subverted in their values. It's those Muslims who don't have that headspace, those Muslims who are not aware of the street culture, those Muslims who are not strong in the practice of their deen. Yes, those people could become influenced by street culture, but not people like you, I'm sure.
Any more questions, please? More questions from the floor? The sisters have been very quiet today. They're clearly not straight. No? Okay. I have another question, Sheikhna. Urban lifestyle is relatively popular and fashionable among young people. What advice would you give to young people who want to be true to themselves and not get mixed up in things that would have a negative impact on themselves?
Unfortunately, the word urban is now associated with a certain type of fashion, a certain type of lifestyle that is bourgeois kind of a lifestyle. Urban is, I don't know, a kind of a hat or a kind of a pair of jeans or, the Nike shoes and, things of that nature. That's what they call urban. Urban is like something you put on the top of a magazine which refers you to the fashion section. That is urban. I'm not talking about that kind of urban. I'm thinking about urban in the classical sense of the word city dweller. City dweller. Those who live in the cities as opposed to the countryside. This is urban. Now, with respect to fashion or with respect to cultural influence, when we are faithful to our principles in Islam, we develop a cultural pattern that reflects these principles. One definition of culture that I like very much is culture is that which is produced between the interaction of your principles and your environment. That's your culture. And so you devise ways by which you could reflect this. For example, men and women should not be mingling too much. How do you let a girl know that you would like to marry her? That's culture. It comes out in some way. Maybe through the parents. Maybe, for example, in university, it might be a different thing. You talk to a friend who communicates to her. This is culture. How we dress is culture. The type of clothing that we wear is related to our environment and related to the influences that we have around us. We modify it in accordance with our principles. When your principles are secure and your cultural form comes out of it, if you are faithful to your culture, other people will follow your culture. If you're not faithful to your culture, you will follow other people's culture. I'll give you a good example. Dreadlocks, right? Dreadlocks was purely a Jamaican Rastafarian thing. They'll go anywhere with dreadlocks. And I tell you something, dreads used to get a lot of trouble. A police is driving, see your dread, he stops you because he thinks you're walking with marijuana. You're in the airport, they're going to give you an extra frisk because you're dreadlocks, but they're stuck with their dreadlocks. Now you got white folks walking around with dreadlocks. You got white folks walking around with dreadlocks. You got white folks wearing ice green and gold bracelets and stuff like that. Why? Because the dread was firm in what he believed in. There was one time the Palestinian scarf was a rage in Toronto. I don't know if it was a rage here, but everybody was wearing Palestinian scarves, including Jews. Right? Because Palestinians, they came into Toronto at a particular point in time, and they were attached to their scarves, and people saw the scarf and said, well, that looks really cool. So when you are faithful to your culture, culture is a dynamic thing, right? It's a dynamic thing. You know, I was talking to a brother one time in Com. He was from England. He was born here, okay? And we were trying to pioneer Nohas and so on in English. And he said, I can't do it. I can only cry in Urdu. Okay? That culture belongs over there. You see? Once we create an indigenous Islamic culture here, it bridges gaps. People can identify with it. But if you continue to practice the cultural forms from over there, it will always remain something alien. So we could create a new kind of urban Islamic culture and find non-Muslims also following it.
Sheikh, and what advice would you give to parents who are worried about their children getting involved in the streets?
You should take my phone number.
Nothing to be on it.
Yeah. You see, again, we need to create. Why kids get involved in non-Islamic activities? Okay, because again, they think that Islam is not cool. All right, Islam is restrictive. Islam doesn't have any ground, and I think that to a certain extent they are right. The kind of Islam that they encounter does not give them that grounding to be confident and go out there in the society. Until we establish a rooted British Islam, where a Muslim feels comfortable in Islam, where a non-Muslim could come among you and also feel some kind of recognition, some kind of familiarity, okay, we'll always have that particular problem. So it is very important for us to get together and practice our Islam and discuss among ourselves the forms that our Islam takes in our various activities and tweak it and make it subtle, you know, and make it relevant to our lives in the society.
Any questions from the floor? No questions from the floor. I have another question, Sheikhna. It's actually regarding the use of poetry and incorporating Western culture in English poetry that's used for things like Muharram, things like for Islamic programs and events and so on, and especially mourning ceremonies. One criticism that I hear prevalently among some brothers and sisters is that it's stripping away the traditional culture and identity of how we mourn for Imam Hussein, for example. What is your response to the use of Western cultural styles in poetry for mourning Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
I think the idea that it's stripping away the essence or the character of mourning ceremonies is an erroneous idea, because that's an idea that's coming from a headspace that is foreign to this environment, okay? It is not to say that you cannot employ certain forms of those cultures here, you know. Indeed, you find a lot of Western, let's say, for example, musicians tend to use Arabic rhythms, for example, in their musical presentations. There's no problem with that. Okay, our rhythms in terms of our chants and so forth, you know, forms could be imported, but also have to be mixed, have to be relevant to this environment. You know, otherwise we'd always have an alien religion. You know, you want people to come in here and to be moved by our rendition of Imam Hussein's suffering. It has to be done according to the rhythm of the people here. It has to be done according to the emotional forms here. You know, I heard, one of the first times where I cried at a presentation of the suffering of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was when I heard an American Southerner, okay, speaking about Imam Hussein in a Southern drawl. Now, if you know American culture, you know that the majority of great African-American preachers speak like Martin Luther King. I like to say that, that type of a way, okay? And this man was talking, it was the anniversary of the martyrdom of Malcolm X. And he was talking about the martyrdom of Malcolm X alongside with the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, alayhi salam, and weaving in the two. You heard people cry in public who never cried in public because they associated this form of preaching with their Christian roots. Okay? So, again, we have to be thinking in terms of cultural dynamic, a cultural dynamism, rather than a static importation of a cultural form.
Okay, sadly that's all the time we have for this evening.